Aaron, what are we going to do with you? Well, at least it's the last species you're hosting, so that's okay.
You used that joke last week.
I say it every time. But he's not sure if I'm serious or not. That's the best part. So, thanks for being here. My name is Mikko, and I don't want to cry. Get it? Get it? Everybody gets it? Good. That's what I'm going to be speaking about. First of all, what really happened since Friday. We've all seen the headlines. We might have seen this firsthand. What really went down and why, and what's the backstory. So, yeah, we've all seen ransom Trojans. I believe I've been speaking about ransom Trojans at Species for the first time 6 years ago. 6 years ago, we started seeing the first ransom Trojans, which were not using Bitcoin as payment at the time, because Bitcoin was just invented 6 years ago. They were using these prepaid credit cards for payments, which didn't work very well for the criminals. But then the megatrend came along, and the megatrend was cryptocurrencies, and that made this such a big problem. Last year in Species, I spoke about the dark history of ransom Trojans. I started from the very first ransom Trojan, which was from 1989. 1989, not 99. That's a pretty old piece of ransomware, but the first ransom Trojan really is from the 1980s. But the time of modern ransom Trojans really started around 6 years ago, and it really escalated with Bitcoin payments as they were invented by these online criminals. So that's what it looks like. We've all seen this. Let's actually look what it looks like when you get infected on a computer. This is a video of a computer getting infected. That's the background getting changed. You have one new icon on your desktop, and then it executes the interface. That's what it looks like when you get hit. However, that display that we just saw, that's the very end of the infection. I mean, first you get infected, then it goes through your system, then it encrypts your document files, and then it shows this. So there might actually be a delay of multiple hours from the moment when you get infected to the moment when you actually see that you're infected. And this is one of the reasons why WannaCry was so successful in spreading between organizations. Because we can all imagine a scenario where, let's say, a consultant is at a customer in a meeting with a laptop connected to the corporate network of the customer, doing some consulting, configuring their network. I mean, you can imagine any case of scenarios. Getting infected while he's there, but he doesn't know he's infected, so he shuts down the lid, carries the infected laptop back to his own headquarters, physically carries the infection in, and then plugs it in to another network, spreading it between two organizations. We saw this happening, and this is one of the reasons why it was so successful and why it went so far and why it went around the world so quick on Friday. So I'm going to show you a map of the spreading speed. Take a look at this. Here we go. This is WannaCry. It went pretty much everywhere, pretty much immediately. And those of you who've been around, who worked in this industry, who worked in computer security for some time, will remember Code Red, will remember Blaster, Slammer, Sasser. They are very, very similar in spreading speeds. This was very fast and very big. It's not the fastest, it's not the biggest we've seen. Slammer still has the world record for spreading speeds. Slammer from 2002, which scanned the whole internet in 17 minutes from the moment when it was released. For WannaCry, it took several hours, but nevertheless, it happened very, very fast. And it's basically just scanning random IP addresses, trying to find vulnerable computers anywhere on the internet. And if it finds one, it's going to jump there. But what really made WannaCry different from Slammer and Blaster and all the old school viruses is that this actually had a payload. It was carrying a ransom Trojan, which would encrypt your files and then demand money from you to get your files back. The very first report I got on Friday afternoon, was an infection here in Spain. The next infection I heard about was in UK. And I guess Europe, especially UK, populated the headlines for Friday. Everybody was speaking about the big companies in Europe, and then a little bit later, big companies in the United States getting hit. But if we actually look at the global statistics, the most hit country in the world is Russia. Number 2 is Ukraine. And this is a bit unusual. Many of the malware we find today actually does not work in Russia. They will refuse to infect machines in Russia. They typically do this by very early on in the code checking the country code of the machine, or even more typically checking the keyboard layout. If the keyboard is Cyrillic, they won't do anything. They will exit. It won't infect the system. And the reason why we see this in so many malware is that a very big part of malware is made in Russia, or made in Ukraine, or made in other Russian-speaking countries, and they're trying to avoid the local law enforcement. They hope that if there are no local victims, the local law enforcement isn't going to be searching for them very actively. This works to an extent, but here, WannaCry didn't do that. It wasn't trying to avoid Russian targets at all, which was the first hint, first tip we had that this might not actually be from Russia. It might be from somewhere else. So why were countries like India, Russia, and Taiwan, and China as well in top 10 hit so hard? Well, this particular piece of malware required the systems to be unpatched or to be running an operating system which cannot be patched. So most of the victims were very large organizations, because when you have hundreds of thousands of workstations, it's hard to keep them all patched. The patch cycles become very long. It might take you 2 months, 3 months, 4 months to patch every single machine you have. In fact, it might take you years to upgrade operating systems. So many of these organizations, yes, they were running Windows XP without the advanced or extended Microsoft support contract, which means they are not getting security updates. So was this Microsoft's fault? Microsoft knew about this vulnerability. Microsoft had patched this vulnerability in middle of March, but they did not patch, for example, Windows XP. They could have patched Windows XP, but they didn't. In fact, because of WannaCry, they did release a patch for Windows XP late on Friday. So should they have patched earlier? Well, no. No, they should not. They should not have patched earlier. Because what got into us this mess to begin with is the fact that we are unable to get rid of old operating systems. The longer we support old legacy operating systems, the more we are going to have problems like this. It's really easy to blame Microsoft for this problem. Yes, they had a vulnerability in their system, but all programs have vulnerabilities because programmers make mistakes. And we cannot expect vendors to support their software forever. Instead, we should encourage the customers to upgrade to more secure current systems instead of running legacy systems forever. In many cases, the reasons why organizations run legacy systems forever is budget reasons. And this clearly was the reason with the British healthcare system, with NHS. They've said this very clearly themselves, that they have so tight budgets, they've been unable to get rid of Windows XP. Well, let me tell you, they will now get rid of Windows XP. They will now get the budgets. I mean, it's pretty obvious. They will get the budgets now. But this is what it took. And this is not right. This is not the right way to do it, is it? Because when you have national healthcare systems infected, when you have ambulance cars backed up outside of hospitals because the computers don't work, this is a very real problem. However, the fact that dozens of hospitals were hit by a ransom Trojan in the UK actually had a bright side. It had a bright side, which is that for once, our medical records were strongly encrypted. Get it? Get it? Edward Montgomery! No, it wasn't Ed, actually, sorry. But this is actually very serious, deadly serious. There's been speculation about, people could have died because of this. I am not aware of anybody dying because of this. But clearly, when healthcare systems are down, it's pretty bad. Here's a quote from a doctor from United Kingdom who works at a hyperacute stroke center. Think about that. You're working at a hyperacute stroke center and your computers go down. I had a patient that needed urgent neurosurgery, but I couldn't do it as I was unable to look at the scans. You have to be able to look at the scans to know where to cut, and you can't look at the scans because the scans are at the computer. And you can't look at the computer because they've been encrypted. This is the problem. And since ransom Trojans are really the only type of malware today that actually shows itself to the user, every single victim knew they've been hit. Like if you get hit by a banking Trojan, you don't know it. You will find out when you get your bank statement and you're missing money, which is much, much later. If you get hit by a keylogger which steals your passwords, you won't see that either. You will notice it indirectly. But when you get hit by a ransom Trojan, it's going to show you a message which tells you that, hello, I am a ransom Trojan. So you will know you've been hit. And if your systems are visible to the public will know you've been hit. So we saw plenty of examples on Friday and Saturday. This is actually from Barcelona. This is a Desigual store here in Barcelona. If you look closely, the door is telling that it's been hit by a ransom Trojan. Here's a fuel pump at the gas station showing the ransom Trojan message. This is from a mall in Singapore. This is the display showing you the map of the mall with the ransom Trojan. Here's somebody tweeting about how he gets home in the evening and the building lobby is hit with the ransom Trojan. Here's a row of ATMs in China. Every single one of them has WannaCry. And here's a display from downtown Bangkok. And maybe my favorite, this is from a car factory assembly line in France. And this particular car company had to stop production because of this particular case. Two more. This is from Frankfurt train station. This is timetables that everybody's looking at, except you can't see it. And I know what you're thinking. Okay, yeah, that's pretty bad, but that's just a timetable system. I mean, yeah, it's hit by ransomware, but surely the actual control center where they control the trains is in a different network and it's not hit by this. That's the control station for the trains. And that's WannaCry. So surprisingly large infections. And the explanation why it was so successful was that the exploit was weapons grade. Why was the exploit weapons grade? Because the exploit was developed and written by National Security Agency. That's why it supported all current and obsolete versions of Windows. That's why it's very reliable, it's not crashing, it's very straightforward to use it. An exploit used by NSA. What NSA was using this for, we don't know. Of course, we can assume that they're using it to do their investigations, to try to gain access to computers of people that they are interested in. Unfortunately, this particular exploit code was leaked to the public. And it was leaked to the public by a group called Shadow Brokers, which is believed to be linked to the group which leaked the Clinton emails during the US presidential elections. By Shadow Brokers, which is believed to be linked to Russian government. So NSA was hacked sometime sometime late last year, 2016. And a large collection, megabytes, actually hundreds of megabytes of their attack tools was stolen by this group. And they've since posted collections of these tools online. Initially, they were trying to sell them. They were actually running Bitcoin auctions where you could buy NSA exploit tools. And when they weren't getting much sales, then they just started dumping them on their website. This is a screenshot from their website, which is in the Bit network, which you can't access from normal public internet. It's not Tor either. This is it's sort of like a variant of the Tor network. It's the Bit network. This is where they posted their Windows Worst collection for auction. They were asking for 750 Bitcoins for this, but then when nobody bought it, they dumped it. And that included Equation Blue, which is a Windows vulnerability targeting SMB. SMB is a feature in Windows which is ready to file and printer sharing, but it really is only used in corporate networks. And this explains why WannaCry didn't really hit home users at all. WannaCry hit large companies which were running big networks with obsolete systems and had enabled the SMB file sharing mechanism. And you really should never expose computers with SMB enabled to public internet. It's quite clear that that's going to really lead to bad things. But there actually are companies which do this, typically by accident. And we know they do this because we scan the internet regularly and we find corporate machines with SMB enabled on the public internet with no firewall blocking the traffic. This is how it got in to at least some of the organizations. There's been a lot of speculation that the original vector for WannaCry must have been something else than SMB. There must have been an email with a dropper or something. Turns out there isn't. Nobody's been able to find any other way. So it really was started organically on Friday by just starting to scan for SMB shares, and it got into some organizations and then through those organizations into other organizations. And if you've been following the news on WannaCry, one thing you might have heard about is a kill switch. Because there's a kill switch inside WannaCry. A kill switch which would stop the spread of the malware. A kill switch which was activated on Friday. A kill switch which prevented much, much larger damages than what could have happened. So what is this? Well, the way we work when we analyze malware in large quantities is that we try to find new samples very quickly, and then we try to analyze them very quickly. So we're able to block malware with our automatic detection systems, which are based on machine learning, which enabled us to block WannaCry. We were effective in blocking WannaCry. But the behind-the-scenes mechanism that we use to build this kind of functionality rely on virtual systems and sandboxes. So we basically take suspect samples that we typically collect ourselves by having hundreds of machines surfing the web hoping to get infected. When we get those machines, our virtual machines, infected, we bring those samples into our backends, which then execute them in systems that look like real workstations, which look like they're connected to the real internet, but they are not. So we're basically running them in a sandbox or running them in a simulated environment. And this enables us to look at what a piece of program would do if a real user would have run it. And then our automation can make decisions that, this program did this, this, and this. That's a good program. This program did this, this, and that. Well, that's a bad program. Automation will then decide if it's good or bad. And the malware writers out there know how we work. They know that this is what we do. So what WannaCry had built in was a detection. It tried to detect if WannaCry was being analyzed in a sandbox. And if it was being analyzed in a sandbox, it wouldn't do anything bad. This is the logic. This is what it tried to do. So how do you detect that you are inside a sandbox? Well, one thing is that these sandboxes are always disconnected from the real internet, because if they would have access to the real internet, then the malware, let's say it's a worm, it would escape and go and infect real systems on the real internet. So, for example, our systems are not connected to the real internet. So when WannaCry is put into a sandbox and executed, the first thing it does is that it tries to connect to this address, .com website. The address is obviously something that you get by pounding at the keyboard and adding .com. It tries to resolve this domain name. Sandboxes that we operate assume that when a program tries to connect to a website or resolve a domain name, they need it. They for example, they're downloading something from there. And if it doesn't work, it's not going to work at all. So sandboxes, security sandboxes, very typically resolve every single domain name. We give a random IP address for every domain. Here you go. This is the IP address. What would you like to get from here? Well, this website doesn't exist. This address was never registered by the creators of WannaCry. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to resolve this domain name. And if they get an IP address, they know that this is fake. This domain should not have an IP address. It has an IP address, which means I am in a sandbox. I'm not going to do anything bad. It's simply going to exit, do nothing. This is why there was this functionality. And on Friday, this blogger called Malware Tech was looking at the code and he saw this domain. And without really thinking what it would happen, he registered the domain. He just bought the domain for $9 and put an IP address on it. And then a little bit later, everybody realized that, hold on, it had stopped. The malware is no longer spreading. Because now it believes that every computer, every real computer, is a sandbox. It goes to a computer, tries to resolve the address, gets an IP address, and exits. So this guy, this Malware Tech guy, he saved the world. He saved the world on Friday. That's pretty neat. Pretty neat indeed. I've spoken to this guy. I've never met the guy in the real world. He lives in UK. He's 22 years old. He's called Marcus in the real world. He actually gave an interview to AP last night, if you want to read about his background. But he was one of the key things that prevented further damage happening from WannaCry. So last night, while we were enjoying the evening here in Barcelona, a new discovery was made regarding WannaCry. Analysts around the world have been looking at and searching for earlier samples of WannaCry to see how it's been developed and try to find out where it came from. And analysts at Google, including one of the guys who used to work for us, who's now working at Google, Antti, they made a discovery on one of the first samples of WannaCry, sort of like test sample of WannaCry, which was found a couple of months ago, because it was sharing code. It had big chunks of code, because on the left we have WannaCry, and on the right we have a sample from the so-called Lazarus group. And this particular sample, which shares quite a bit of code with WannaCry, is actually a piece of malware which was used around 18 months ago in the attack against Swift. You might remember this case. A row of large-scale heists done against international banks, which were using the SWIFT network to transfer money between international banks. A heist in which the attackers tried stealing roughly $1 billion, billion with a B. Managed to steal around $100 million, so a lot of money. And you might also remember, because I spoke about this last year here at Species, that we are able to link the Swift attack to an attack from 2015, 2014, in which Sony Pictures was hacked. And Sony Pictures was hacked because they were about to publish a movie called The Interview. And in the movie, The Interview, there is a segment during which the dictator of North Korea, Kim Jong-un, gets killed in a chopper. Spoiler alert. Sorry for spoiling the movie for you, but he gets killed in the chopper. And Sony Pictures was hacked by North Korea, which means Swift was hacked by North Korea, which means apparently WannaCry was made by North Korea. We could, of course, have false flags. It's obviously doable that attackers can take code from other malware and recycle it to make it look like it's someone who it's not. But right now, the jury is still out, but it's perfectly possible that this actually is North Korea. North Korea recycling weapon-grade exploits from US national security agencies to infect the world in order to collect ransom payments. And this sounds outlandish. Like, why would any government do this? Like, how desperate do you have to be to start using ransom Trojans to, fix your budget deficit? But then again, North Korea is not a normal government. Just as an example, for a decade, North Korea's official money printing presses have been printing fake dollars, so-called super dollars, which are being printed by a foreign government, North Korean government. Of course, a government can make pretty good fakes because they have government-grade printing presses for money. So they can make very good quality fake money. They've been doing that for a decade. So maybe it is plausible that they were trying to cash in with the NSA vulnerabilities by using a tested and tried tactique of ransom Trojans, because ransom Trojans work. We've seen ransom Trojans make millions and millions of money for many other groups. In fact, who knows, maybe some of the previous ransom Trojan operations that we don't know where they're coming from, maybe they're coming from North Korea as well. We don't know this. It's a little bit weird. This is all happening very quick. But there are links between these samples, and it might actually be that WannaCry is coming from North Korea. But if it did come from North Korea, they failed in monetizing it. There's probably many reasons why the actual payments from victims haven't been very active. But right now, I just checked 15 minutes ago, 261 victims have paid. There's more than 200,000 infected machines on the planet, or there was on Saturday. 261 have paid, which means the total amount of money paid with today's currency is $69,000, which is nothing. So that's pretty remarkable. If this was a ransom Trojan operation, it failed to monetize. And of course, here the amount of damage caused by the attackers compared to the benefit they got in money really doesn't add up. I mean, you take a massive, you cause a massive amount of damage for very little money. It's sort of like, I don't know, going to steal a grocery store and you shoot the cashier to steal the cash. You know, you cause a really big damage for very little money. This is what it was. Whatever it was, this is a highly unusual case. WannaCry is the biggest ransomware outbreak in history. And if this governmental link is true, this is totally outlandish. Because we have investigated thousands of governmental cases over the last 14 years. The very first governmental case we investigated was in 2003. And during those investigations, our research puts every single one of those attacks into two groups. Everything we've seen that's coming from governments is either espionage or sabotage. Sabotage like Stuxnet, or sabotage like Prkarpatto Oblenergo, which was the Russian attacks against the Ukrainian power grid. Or espionage, which is what most of it is, stealing information. But this is not sabotage, this is not espionage, this is theft. And if this indeed is that, then it is a complete outlier. The megatrend that made ransom Trojans a phenomenon is cryptocurrencies. And by far the most common cryptocurrency is Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the way criminals are able to collect ransom. The preferred currency criminals use amongst themselves actually is not Bitcoin. They prefer Monero, which is even more anonymous than Bitcoin. And we're seeing Bitcoin being used as a ransom tool, not just in ransom Trojans, but also in targeted ransom attacks, like cases that we've seen more and more recently where a company gets hacked and their databases are stolen, like their customer database is stolen or overwritten. And then they are contacted and they're asking for a payment. And one thing we've seen from these cases, because these are not Trojans, these are targeted manual hackings, what we've seen in these is that these guys clearly have no idea what size is the right size for a ransom. So for example, in this ransom note, they're asking for 0.15 bitcoins, which is a couple of $100. In other cases, they're asking for thousands of bitcoins, which is millions. So clearly, they don't know how valuable the data they've stolen is. They don't know how much money to ask. And this, my friends, will change next May. This is going to change on May 24th, 2018. Because on May 24th, 2018, we will enter the time of the General Data Protection Regulation set in by European Union, which applies to any company on the planet that handles personal information of European citizens, which basically means every company on the planet. And the regulation, the GDPR regulation, can set fines to companies that leak customer information and who haven't taken proper care of the customer information. And that fine can be up to 4% of the company's global revenues. So what I am forecasting now is that next May, we will start seeing attacks where a company is hacked, their customer database is stolen, and then they receive an email. The CFO gets an email. Hello, we stole your customer database. It wasn't very well protected. Now we're going to leak it on the internet, after which you will get a fine of 4% of your revenue, unless you pay us, 2% of your revenue. And any CFO on the planet will look at this. Okay, that's 4%, that's 2%. This is less. We're going to pay 2%, right? So what GDPR will do is that it will set a base price. Now criminals know how valuable the data is. Now they know how much they should be asking as a ransom. Now in this new day and age let's say the revolution that we've lived through, we've seen all the computers on the planet get connected to each other. It's actually funny. When I joined F-Secure, we had a bunch of computers on our desks, PCs and Macs, just like today. But the difference was that those PCs and Macs were not online. And what I mean by saying that they were not online, I don't mean that they were not on the internet. Internet didn't really exist. But I mean that they were not even connected to each other. Really. We had no local area network when I joined this company. So if you worked on one computer and you wanted to move the files, you used a floppy disk and you walked. This is how we moved files. So really, during our lifetime, every computer on the planet has gone online. They're all connected now. We've seen this revolution happen. And the next revolution we're going to see to happen, which is starting right about now, is when everything else than computers goes online. So far it's been computers and, pocket computers. These have gone online. Next up, everything else. Anything that we plug into the wall, anything that uses electricity will be plugged into the internet as well. And I will have to confess that I really had to look at this picture for longer than I dared to say before I realized what was wrong with the picture. That's not how you install it. But if you plug something to electricity grid, in the future you will also plug it to the internet grid. And you might have heard the law that I coined around this, which is that if something is smart, then it's vulnerable. So here we have a smartphone, a vulnerable phone. A smart watch, a vulnerable watch. A smart car, smart city. You get the point. If something has functionality, if it can be programmed, it can be hacked. And in some cases, it might even be devices which are traditionally not connected to the internet or not connected to the power, which are now going online. Let me play you this clip about this IoT mattress. And I know what you're thinking. Like, why would you put your mattress online? But this is actually a company here in Spain, which is making mattresses called Smartress. And they actually put sensors inside the mattress, and then they have an app. And the app will warn you when you're out of your house if someone is using the mattress without your knowledge in a suspicious way. I shit you not, it is a real product. They really are making this. And look at that. Whoop, whoop. Yeah. And of course, it's made here in Spain. So, now that obviously everything is going online, what's the problem with this? What's going to happen? Well, last month we found a vulnerability from dishwashers. If you would connect to the web server on a Miele dishwasher, there would be a web server directory traversal vulnerability. By using this get script, you would actually get the password from the system. But let me just repeat the beginning of my last sentence. When you connect to the web server on your dishwasher, what? Like, why would you have a web server on your dishwasher? But this is the world we're going to. It's going to happen whether we like it or not. And it also means that things like our cars will be online. And I'm not really worried about car hacking. I actually believe that the problem we're going to get from car hacking and let's say self-driving cars is that self-driving cars will eventually become self-stealing cars. You can imagine your car driving off on its own in the middle of the night because it gets hacked. I mean, you know it. It's going to happen, right? It's going to happen. I mean, attacks like that make sense. Attacks where somebody hacks your car to drive you off a road, they don't really make sense. They don't make any money by killing you. And killing people is illegal, by the way. But, stealing cars, that makes sense. We're going to see that. But when I look at systems like these, like, this internet cloud system in this Toyota, what I really wonder is that how long will this work? Like we spoke just about Windows XP, which is out of support and no longer gets patches or security updates. But when you buy a car, you expect it's going to work at least, 15, 20, 30 years, right? I'm driving an 18-year-old car right now. I expect to be driving it at least for another 10 years. And if it really requires a backend, like a cloud server somewhere, how long will that be running? How long will somebody be paying the AWS bills to keep the cloud backend rolling? How long will it be getting patches? And if the cloud backend goes down, eventually it will go down, what's going to happen then? And we saw an example of that last month because Amazon's S3 storage platform went down. And I was following on Twitter as people were tweeting about problems in their homes. Like this guy explaining that his oven was on when Amazon went down. Now he can't turn his oven off. Like, what the hell? Here's another one. This guy explains that his home humidifier, air humidifiers, TLS certificate expired, after which it dumped the water on the ground. I mean, your humidifier has an SSL certificate, which requires updating. And if you don't do it, it's going to fail. And all these IoT problems remind me of what we used to have in our living rooms in the 1980s. Because we all had one of these bad boys, didn't we? VHS players, right? You put in a tape and then you watch your movie. And when you would go to any of your friends' house, they would have in the living room a massively big TV and then a VHS player underneath. And on the display of the VHS player, on every house, it was displaying the same thing. It was always displaying a blinking 12 o'clock. Am I right? I'm right. So why was it showing this? Well, because when you plug it in the wall, it doesn't know what time it is. And now it expects you to read through the manual. Because on page 80, they explain to you how to set the time. And we never did that, did we? And this is exactly what we do with IoT devices. You can imagine yourself going and buying a brand new IoT security camera to watch your summer cottage. And you take it home and you unpack it. And you screw it on the wall, and you install the app, and you pair your phone to the camera. And then it works. You get the picture, you get the video. It works. Don't touch it. Don't change anything. It works. This is what we do. Which means we never read the manual, which means we never get to page 280, which explains to us how to set the password on the camera or how to segment the network so that some people can that you can't access the admin interface from the internet, for example. It's exactly the same problem that we had in the 1980s. So, is anybody doing this right? Is anybody doing IoT right? A friend of mine went shopping to Ikea last month, and he bought this Ikea trådfri lamp system, which is an IoT lamp with an iPhone app that you can turn off the lights from your phone. And he was sort of chuckling to himself as he was driving home that, he's going to check what this thing has eaten because it's probably going to suck. And then he went home and, installed it and scanned the network and looked at the operating system, and he was surprised that, hold on, this is actually very good. It's not running any general purpose operating system. It's running an embedded real-time operating system with no active services, with no open ports. It's listening to traffic on one open UDP port, but it only accepts authenticated traffic, only accepts signed updates. I mean, this is actually very good, not bad at all. Which really, frankly, to me, is surprising that Ikea, of all companies, is leading the way in making secure IoT devices. And I've actually since then spoken with the Ikea people. They're very serious about this. And I don't know why they, of all companies, are like investing money into making more secure devices, but I'm guessing that the Ikea business model is that the margins on one product are very thin. As we know, it's cheap. Everything on Ikea is cheap, especially the meatballs. And if your margins are very thin, then you make the money by selling tons of the products. You sell millions of the product all over the world, which is what Ikea does. And they sell the same product for years and years. This is how they make the millions they make. And if that's your business model, then the worst thing that can happen to you is a recall. If there's something wrong with the product, even years from this moment, and you have to take them back, that's going to eat all the money you ever made. So it actually makes sense to invest money at the R&D phase for a new product to make it secure, and then hope that that's going to prevent future recalls. But Ikea is pretty much the only good example I know, which means we are not really running any shortage for market, for sense, because the IoT revolution really is here. So the biggest things happening around us right now is ransom Trojans like WannaCry and the IoT revolution. And I'm pretty happy about how we are able to cope with both of them. We are able to handle problems like these. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Are we going to do questions or questions? Go. Couple? Do you want to take a couple?
Questions?
Yeah.
If they are really nasty ones.
Only for you, Mikko. We tried to deliver. Yeah, thanks. Well, actually, Mikko, maybe there won't be any questions. Are there any questions for Mikko? Sorry, excuse me. Thanks.
Yeah, this is maybe a little bit nasty, but you've said many times about the smart cars that you don't think killing people with them is a real thing. I guess that's a question of volume, because I guess governments, hitmen, and things like that will potentially want to kill people with something deniable at distance and so on. Is that really just not a case? Or?
First of all, and for the record, I hate the way you think. Because you're right. Of course, for the really extraordinary cases, of course, it could be done. But this reminds me of what I've tried to explain to companies who are worried about getting hit by foreign intelligence agencies, is that, yeah, some companies do get hit by foreign intelligence agencies, but most do not. Because most of us, as individuals, and most of our companies are not worth spying for. I mean, if you have to worry about James Bonds, if James Bonds of the world are after you and they want to kill you, then yes, your car could kill you. But most of us are not being hunted by James Bonds. So I'm basically trying to speak the message that applies to most people. Because this is the message that applies to most people. But you are right, and I hate that.
Okay, Mikko, just briefly, last question.
All right.
Oh.
Okay.
Go on, try.
Is it on?
Was it gone off again?
I can hear myself.
Yes.
Okay. The question is about WannaCry. If the kill switch wasn't found, how big would it have gotten?
How big would it be if the kill switch would not have been found? It would have been much, much worse in the biggest countries, especially in Asia and China, because it was fairly late in the day when it started. For example, Far East was already sleeping. Definitely people were out of the office. So we would have seen, we now saw around 200,000 infected machines. We could have seen 2 million, at least. So it could have been much worse. And that's it.
Okay, big round of applause
Thank
for Mikko.